As usual, for episode 7, we hear a theme song. Then we hear Kimber's voice saying, "Wait a minute, hold it." Then she says, "I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm afraid I have bad news. Jim's gone, my sister Jerica's missing, and here's the worst news. The holograms are no more." So in other words, what Kimber's telling all the fans the bad news, and even the worst news of all, that the holograms will never play the music again. And then Kimber explains why. Then she says, "Well, I suppose this whole mess was my fault. Sort of." So anyway, flashback, we go back to how this whole mess started just 3 months ago at Jericho's upstairs office at Starlight Music. There's a meeting going on with Shayna, Asha, Kimber, Rhea, and of course Rio. The first thing that Shayna wants to talk about is about the logo's colors for Starlight Music and what Jericho thought of it. Then Jericho says, "Not bad, but what the logo needs is to brighten it up for our office a little bit." "Okay," Sheena said, and then she left. So then it's Rio's turn to ask Jericho about the stage lights and which she prefers. "Well, Rio," Jericho says, "as of this moment, the budget itself is somewhat unaffordable. All right, we'll settle for the old-fashioned ones instead," and then he heads off. So then it's Kimber's turn to remind her sister to say, Jim needs an opinion on Regine's new clothes with the Countess." Then Kimber also says that that opinion needs to be done that afternoon. "I'm well aware of it," Jericho says, and then told her sister to quote get off her case. So Kimber was asking, "What's with you anyway? I just wanted to help you, that's all." So Kimber says, "You know something? I don't think you appreciate me." "What do you mean I don't appreciate you?" Jerica asked. "Well, that did it. That was the last straw." So Jerica says, "Everyone out! Out, out, out!" So back to the present in the bedroom of Starlight Mansion, Jerica's sister, Kimber, has no idea just how much under pressure that Jerica's been, and she's never seen her act this way. So flashback at the Hollywood Bowl later on that afternoon. According to Kimber, since the holograms are going to be performing a little bit later, so they figured they should set up. So that's what they did. That was until after Jericho received a phone call from Rio telling her the bad news that for some unknown reason his van broke down. Well, after the phone call ended, Jericho says, "I told Rio to get that van fixed moments ago." So that means that Jim has to set everything up by herself. So when Kimber was asking, "What are you doing?" because she just saw Jim setting up the speaker by herself, and she says, "Well, someone has to set up for the concert." So the holograms agreed to help. Rhea and Shayna, who are helping Jerica, has never seen her act this way. So back to the present in the bedroom of Starlight Mansion. Kimber explains further that she knows her sister and there's no way she could have known that she has seen these signs coming of stress and overwork. And she asked the question, "How was I supposed to know that one day it will lead to Ben's breakup?" Then suddenly Kimber just hears the voice of Pizzazz, the leader of the Misfits, saying, "What are you standing around for? We're late. We gotta go." "Okay, I'm coming," Kimber said. And then Kimber looks at the audience and then tells them, "I don't like this any more than you do." So meanwhile, backstage at the Hollywood Bowl, it's now Rhea at the hologram's turn to tell her side of the sad story. She explains that ever since she joined the holograms for more than a year, she thought she was going to be happy, or so she thought. So we go to Rhea's flashback the night of the concert when the holograms are started to perform before the audience. But the holograms realize that they're not the only ones. The Stingers are doing it too. So according to Rhea, as you may have guessed it, the Stingers went first to perform, as usual. So what better way to start the Stingers' song with Under My Spell? And as you may have guessed it, according to Rhea, Jim, as always, is being enchanted by Riot, the leader of the Stingers' charms. So when the song came to an end, the audience cheered, and so Riot and Jim were hanging out the back and got into the white limousine. As Rhea explained further in the flashback scene that she had no idea just how much pressure Jim's been under lately. So, in the flashback scene, when Rhea and her friends tries to stop Jim and Riot from leaving, they unfortunately have failed miserably. Then back to the present, when Rhea explains that it all happened so quick. They, being Rhea and her friends, were in shock. They were dismayed until suddenly Rhea saw Roxy of the Misfits show up with the glitter and gold roaster coming to pick up Rhea. It was after Rhea said that the worst was yet to come. So Roxy was asking Rhea, "What are you standing around for? We have work to do." Now Rhea, who was disgusted and ashamed, has no choice but to leave with Roxy. So meanwhile, it's now Riot of the Stinger's turn to plead his case when he and Jim are on a deserted island. So Riot goes first to speaking his case to say, "At last, Jim is all mine. No holograms, no real, no nothing. I mean, sure, from the start I may have laid it on pretty thick for a while, but in the end I got what I want." So flashback on the same night that Jim and Riot had left the Hollywood Bowl after the concert ended, what they did is they arrived at the docks where the ship named Christina was parked at the docks. So as Jim and Riot had boarded on the cruise ship, Jim says, "Where are we going?" "Well, we're getting away from it all," Riot said. "Think about it," Riot says, and then asked a question. "Have you ever been on a cruise to Mexico before?" However, Jim thought of it and said that that's a splendid idea, but just when Jim was about to finish her sentence, but he told her, "Just don't give it another thought." But then Jim said to Riot, "But I just can't just leave my friends like that." "As a matter of fact, you could and you will. And you just did. Don't make no second thoughts about it now." So when Jim saw that the cruise ship was leaving, she soon realizes that Riot had been proven right. Once Jim realizes that Riot had been right, so she says, "Well, I suppose a couple of days wouldn't hurt." So Riot says, "Well, that's exactly what we both need right now." So Jim and Riot did what any normal people will do. They were having dinner under a moonlight. They were dancing, playing roulette, having fun, having a good time. So after that, Jim and Riot were staring at the stars in the night sky. And that's when Jim says, "You know something? We're the only two people in the world right now." "As a matter of fact, we are," Riot said. So Jim says, "I don't know about you, but I'm having fun. You're right about one thing. Resting and relaxing will be just the thing I need. But then I had to get back because I miss my sister and my friends." Then Rice says, "Who needs them when we only got each other?" So back to the present on the deserted island. That's when Red told the audience, "Well, it's like I told you before. In the end, I got what I wanted." So meanwhile, in the recording studio, it's now Asha, the hologram's turn to explain this sad case. She said that she and her friends were hoping that Jim would return in a few days, or so they thought. Then Asha said that when Jim didn't come back, that's when things went downhill from there. The hologram stopped performing, they dropped off the charts, and that's when things got even more worse. Minx and Rapture couldn't perform without Riot either since he too was MIA, and that's when everything got even more worse. Then Asha says that all that she and her friends could do was hope and pray that Jim would come to her senses so she can come back. So flashback, we go back to Kimber's office at Starlight Music when creditors were hopping mad demanding to be paid. So after Kimber went out the window and went one floor down to Asha's office, she told Asha, "I hope Jerica comes back soon. There's no telling what could happen. We can't hold these critters back for very long." But Asha didn't listen to Kimber. She chose to ignore her. So when Kimber was asking Asha, "What's the matter with you? Didn't you hear what I said?" Then Asha said, "Here, Kimber, read it and weep." So Kimber went ahead and read the postcard that Asha's looking at. And what Kimber saw was shocking. It's a letter from Jim saying that she's having a good time in Mexico with Riot of the Stingers. She has fallen in love with him. And so, as of this moment, what the letter said next is that she's no longer going to be with the holograms anymore. But wait, there's more. It says to tell Rio to never forget about her and he'll always have a special place in her heart. Kimber was horrified, and so was Asha, and now they're left to wonder how to break this bad news to Shayna and Rhea when they learned about it. So Kimber says, "Oh boy, are we in serious trouble?" So back to the present in the recording studio. Asha explains that that result marked the beginning of the end for the holograms, and worst of it all, Starlight Charity is in serious jeopardy. But then Asha was told by Pizzazz of the Mistress to say, "Hey, keep up the beat, will you?" So meanwhile, at Starlight Music's upstairs office, it's Pizzazz of the Misfits' turn to speak in her case to say that she and the Misfits had been recently had gained control of Starlight Music, something that Eric would have wanted and should have wanted from the start, but instead she has it on her own terms. Then Possess also said that everything changed ever since Jim ran off with Riot, of the Stingers that is, so neither the holograms nor the Stingers could perform without their leaders. So, in Possess's case, what did she do? She forced the holograms and the Stingers, since without their leaders, can perform under her control. And Possess wanted to tell the audience to say, "Oh, you're probably wondering, how did I pull that off?" Well, as Possess explains when flashback, it all started in bankruptcy court. So meanwhile there's Kimber on the right hand side with Aja of the holograms and along with the Starlight Girls who were also there. Ashley, Terry, Chrissy, Bonnie, and Layla. And on the left hand side we have Harvey, who's Pizzaz's father, and along with Pizzazz and her bandmates. Anyway, Shayna and Rhea, who were also there in bankruptcy court, just overheard the judge telling Kimber, "Well, you can always have an option to have a deal with Mr. Gabor here." Then Kimber panicked and said to the judge, "You make it sound like we don't have a choice here." "Well, there's another option," judge said. So what the judge is telling Kimber that she can sell everything that she owns at Starlight Music. It's either that or lose the control of Starlight Music and give it to Harvey. And as for the Starlight Girls, they'll have a different place to live. The Starlight Girls panicked and went up to Kimber. So Christy goes first to speak in her case and begged Kimber not to give up the Starlight House and that they had come too far and they worked too hard to give it up. So Chrissy then tells Kimber, "Whatever you do, please don't send us away." So Kimber tells Chrissy, "I guess there's only one thing I can do." Then tells Harvey that the Starlight Music now belongs to him. So Kimber decides to give the control to Possess's father. The Misfits cheered to see that they've won their battle in bankruptcy court. So back to the present in the upstairs office, Possess says, "Wait, here's the best part. Since now that the holograms, according to their contract, which was signed by them, they had no choice but to do whatever we tell them to do. That means Possess's bandmates and, of course, Minxton Rapture, the Stingers themselves. So, in other words, in Possess's case, everyone became misfits. That would include Binks and Rapture of the Stingers and the rest of the holograms, since they couldn't perform without their leaders. So now Possess on the top of her own desk just kicks some papers up into the air and says, "At last, we're on top of the world. Even better, we're at the top of the charts." So speaking of which, we go into that song Top of the Charts by the Misfits themselves. So when the song came to an end, back with Riot of the Stingers on the deserted island with Jim, he said that he had everything thought out, or everything planned in his case, or so he thought. When flashback, we go back to the cruise ship Cristino, now on the coast of Mexico, and it's 3 days later, and of course, according to Riot, that's when he didn't realize that everything fell apart. So anyway, when Jim and Riot had arrived in Mexico, "So this is where we are?" Jim asked. "Of course," Riot said. Then Riot pleaded his case of how wonderful 3 days had been. "3 days?" Jim says and said, "Oh my goodness, we gotta go back right now." "What's your hurry?" Riot asked. So Jim explains in her case that she has responsibilities, her friends, and etc. So then it's Rice's turn to plead his case to say, "You haven't seen me water ski yet." So that's what he did. And that's Jim driving the motorboat while Wright was busy water skiing. So after that was finished, Wright went back on the motorboat with Jim. And she says, "Okay, I seen it. May I go back now?" So Wright wants to know, "What's the matter? Am I too perfect of a man for you?" So Jim says to Riot, "Now don't take it wrong. You do know how to show Moment a good time." So Riot wants to know from Jim, has she made up her mind about him? So Jim said, "What are you talking about? I haven't made up my mind yet." So Riot must have suspected that she might have. So Jim says, "What do you mean?" At first, Jim rejected Riot because of Rio. So then Riot speaks in his case to say, "Now don't take it wrong. Rio may be best, but I'm stronger and smarter than he is. It's too bad he didn't suspect anything." "Suspect what?" Jim asked. "What do you mean?" So Riot, however, accidentally let slip to tell Jim what had happened just 3 days ago with Rio and his van when it broke down. And what Riot did is that he disguised himself as a mechanic to have his van sabotaged instead of fixing it up. Jim couldn't believe what she heard from Riot. That for the past 3 days, that's when Riot also accidentally let slip to tell Jim, "No wonder you've been upset with Rio and your friends." And that's when Jim knew she had been fooled. She had been tricked. And she says, "What? You mean to say that you're the one who sabotaged Rio's van to begin with? And you made me lose all my friends and my responsibilities for this?" "You had to believe me," Jim Wright says. "This was for your own good." So Jim demanded Wright to take her back this minute, but he refused. Then Wright says, "Jim, I'm not going to rest until I have you by my side." Well, that did it. For Jim, it was the final and last straw. So she told Wright that she had reached her limit. And then she says, "Since you won't take me back, then I'll have to take myself back instead." So guess what she did? She took control of the motorboat. That was until Wright decides to take that control away from Jim, and that's what caused the boat to lose control and then crash into some jagged rocks up ahead. And that's what caused the boat to crash. So that's why Wright and Jim had ended up on the desert island. Although Jim's unconscious for the moment, and that's when Riot looks at the audience to say, "Don't worry, she'll be fine." So after Jim woke up minutes later, she says, "Who are you talking to?" So Riot says, "Never mind that. Just relax, you'll be fine." So meanwhile, at Starlight Mansion with Minx, Rapture, the holograms, and Rio, that's when Minx has her turn to speak in her case that said that ever since that herself, Rapture, and Riot started the band together, they thought everything was going to be fine, or so they thought. Even Rapture agrees with Minx, and then Minx also explains that since she and Rapture couldn't go on without Riot, things just haven't been the same. And as for Rio, he's been depressed ever since Jim's been missing, and all he's been doing was ignoring her and Rapture and staring at the postcard all day long. So anyway, it's now up to Minx to take matters in her own hands. So what she did is that since she's sick and tired of being ignored, she snatched the postcard away from Rio. Rio tries to give it back from Minx, but he was unsuccessful, and all he did was knock over a lamp, breaking it to pieces, by accident, of course. So Minx wants to know from Rio, what's so special about that postcard anyway? So after Rio was distracted by the sound of the lamp crash by the hoggers who entered the living room, and that's when Rio says, "Well, that's the postcard that what we've heard is the last from Jim." So after Rio gets his postcard back, that's when Minx accidentally lets slip to tell Rio it isn't even written by Jim anyway. So Kimmer, after she heard that from Minx, she says, "What do you mean it isn't written by her? Of course it's from her. We know the handwriting when we see it." And that's when Minx says, "Well, think about it. It's all a fake." And then she also accidentally let slip to say that handwriting wasn't Jim's, it was Riot's handwriting. The holograms, including Rapture and Rio, just couldn't believe what they heard. They said, "Say what? Did you say Riot wrote this?" "Pay attention," Mink says, "because look at that postmark there. There's a letter R there." So what Mink's been telling everyone that the handwriting was a fake. It was all a lie. So when Kimber looks at the postmark that Minx had explained, she says, "Well, by golly, you're right." So then Rio says, "Wait a minute. If Jim didn't write this, then that means that there's still hope. We had to go find her right away." So Minx, Rapture, the holograms, and Rio went to go find Jim. So you know what they did? They decided to take the glitter and gold roaster and then left the mansion. On their way out, the Misfits were playing croquet with Ashley, Bonnie, and Chrissy of the Starlight Girls. That was until Pizzazz of the Misfits just saw the glitter and gold roaster just left the mansion. She says, "Hey, where are you all going? Come back here with my car." But the roaster left anyway. So it's now Ashley of the Starlight Girls' turn to tell the audience, "Well, if you think for 1 minute we're going to put up with the Misfits any longer, you're crazy." So she and the Starlight Girls decided to take matters in their own hands. So guess what they did? They decided to approach Pizzazz of the Misfits. And one of them, Bonnie, after the girls approached her and says, "Guess what? It's time for a school semester and we need more clothes." So Pizzazz, after she brushes the girls away, and that's when Ashley says, "Well, since that's how you feel about it, let's see what the foster care has to say. And then they're going to take this foundation away from you." So after Possess was convinced otherwise, she says, "All right, you talked me into it. Let's go shopping." Back with Rio and the girls, well, good news, they found a boatman that they could speak with. Well, the boatman just told Rio that previously the boat has been rented by Rio and Jim, but the strange part is the boat that was rented previously hasn't come back yet. That's because when the Coast Guard couldn't find it anywhere, it's since been lost. But the boatman just told Rio the good news. There's something even better, a map. So after Rio was given a map, so you know what this means. It was time for Rio and the girls to split up. So Minx decides to go with Rio in one boat, while the rest of the Hogwarts went into the other two boats. So all three of the boats head off. So meanwhile, at Starlight Music's upstairs office, Pizzazz and the Mistress couldn't believe with all the bills that they had to pay for everything that they did with the Starlight Girls, all the shopping that they did. When Eric shows up minutes later, he asks the question, "Are we having a problem here, ladies?" "Well, there's nothing we can't handle," Pizzazz says. "I was wondering where we're going to stand from here. Can you help us out?" Well, Eric was more than happy to until after he did all the calculations, he says, "Well, girls, we have a problem because Starlight Music is under a lot of debt than what it was when you first took it over." So, in other words, what Eric is telling the mistress that since they've been shopping with the Starlight Girls, it cost the company a whole lot of money. So, in other words, Starlight Music is going broke. Back with Rio and Minx, in good news, they found a wrecked motorboat that was crashed when it went out of control. So after they arrived at the deserted island, they knew that there was no time to waste. So Rio got off the boat first, and then Minx runs to catch up with him. So after Minx catches up with Rio, and by the time they arrived, they saw Jim and Riot relaxing in their hammocks. They just couldn't believe what they'd seen. So Ming says, "Well, what do you know? They're not hurt. I guess they're having a time of their lives." Rio realizes that what Ming said is true, and he says, "I guess Jim wants to spend the rest of her life with Riot after all. Come on, Minx, let's go. Let's leave them alone." So as Rio turns to leave, that's when Ming said to Rio, "Are you crazy? If you think for 1 minute I'm going to spend the rest of my life working for those misfits, you're out of your mind." So once again, just like she did at the mansion, it's now up to Minx to take matters in her own hands. So when Riot looked at her and says, "What are you doing here?" So Minx says, "Would you believe we're looking for you?" "Oh, by the way," Mink says, "Rio's with me." And Jim says, "Wait, did you say Rio? Where did he go?" "Well, he's heading back to the boat right now." So Jim runs to catch up with Rio, who is ashamed and depressed. In the meantime, Minx decides to have a chat with Riot. Back with Rio, who is on his way back to the boat, that's when Jim says, "Hey, Rio, wait up." So finally, Rio stopped and looked at Jim, and she says, "Oh, Rio, I'm so glad you found me in Riot." Then she had a confession to make, and she says, "Well, Rio, I got some bad news. We've been tricked all along. Riot sabotaged their fan to begin with, and that explains this horrible mess." Back with Riot, he's now upset with Minx to say, "You see what you did? This was your fault. Now, because of you, you ruined my happy life with Jim." So, speaking of Jim, back with her and Rio, they reunited with a kiss after Jim explains how this awful mess happened. But that was until Riot's voice says, "Hey, you get your hands off of Jim." So Riot pleaded his case with Rio to say, "You're not going anywhere with her." "Well, that may be true," Rio says, "but you're not going to keep her in your arms for very long." And that's when both of the men, Riot and Rio, decide to have combat with each other. So it's now up to Jim to break it up. She says, "Wait a minute, gentlemen. Now, don't take it wrong. I know it's honorable and all, but you two don't have to fight over me. I'm not a prize to be claimed for. I have the right to choose just like everyone." So Jim told Riot, "I've made my decision. I had reached my limit. So guess what? I decided that I'm leaving." But she's not the only one because the holograms and Rio had left too. So everybody left the island. So now in their motorboats, the holograms, Jim and Rio, and that's when Jim says, "I just can't wait to get back." "Well, don't celebrate yet," Asha says. "If I know the Stingers, they're going to be back soon as well, since they've been a thorn in our sides." "Well, I wouldn't go that far," Rio says, "because guess what? He took an extreme precaution to remove the spark plug from the motorboat. So, you know what that means. Thanks to Rio's clever move on his part, the Stingers are not going to go anywhere for a while." So, back with the Stingers in their boat, since the motor won't start thanks to Rio, so that means all three of them will have to paddle their way back, even if it had to take them at least 3, 4 days, give or take. I can't say for sure. So now that everyone's made it back to Starlight Mansion, now Kimber explains to Jerica, here comes a bigger problem. Since the Misfits are in control of Starlight Music, there's no telling what could happen. "I agree," Jerica says. "So, in other words, they're not going to give up, at least without a fight." So, now that everyone, Kimber, Jerica, Asha, Shayna, Rhea, and Rio, go inside Starlight Mansion, but by the time they did, that's when they realized that the Starlight Girls, well, let's just say they got the situation under control. When Jerga and her friends had arrived inside the living room, what they saw was unbelievable. Bonnie was having a pillow fight with Eric. Terry was talking on the telephone. Ashley is up in the chandelier hitting Pizzazz with a broom, while everybody else just slides down the guardrail on the stairway. So when Pizzazz looks at Jerga, she says, "Why, Jerga, it's good to see you." So Jerga approached Possess and says, "Well, I have a score to settle with you. So it's now my turn to take you to court." But Possess just cuts her off and says, "Wait a minute. If you want Starlight Music and the Foundation and the Starlight Mansion back so bad, well, they're all yours." As Possess turns to leave, that's when Eric says, "Wait! Give me Starlight Music instead." Then Possess looks at Eric and says, "Are you out of your mind?" "Well, even better," Eric says. "I paid a whole fortune for it. So guess what? Bonnie of the Starlight Girls was hugging Eric while the rest of the Starlight Girls surround him." But then Eric says, "On second thought, I withdraw my offer." So before leaving, Possess tells Jerga and her friends, "Here you are. They're all yours." So when Eric runs to catch up with Possess to say, "Wait for me!" And that's when both Possess and Eric left the mansion. So you know what this means. Jerga got everything back. Starlight Mansion, Starlight Music, and of course the Starlight Foundation itself. So you know what this means. She has everything back. So it's cleanup time. So you know what this means. With the Starlight Girls' help, they were busy sweeping and mopping the floor, straightening up the mirror. And as for the holograms, they threw away all of the Misfits posters and magazines and everything else. When back at Starlight Music, Jerga has her own upstairs office back. Then, during the hologram song of All's Right in the World, thanks to Rhea in the crane truck with the wrecking ball, the billboard of the Mistress was destroyed. And of course, Jim's billboard was back on the rooftop. Yep, the holograms are back in action. They're back on the charts, back on the records, they're back on the talk show with Lindsay Pierce, they're back to doing concerts, and even better, Jim's fans begins loving Jim and the Bandmates again. What's even more better is that the hologram's fans began attending shows again. So when the song came to an end, you know what this means? In the holograms' case, the music isn't really dead after all. And so that ends episode 7.